Please click like and subscribe and that little notification bell for the next episode. All right, after you eat at the Hammond House, it's only logical to go up the road and
visit the Will Rogers Museum.
And there you're going to meet Andy.
That's right, he's the tour guide.
This is my friend Steve Grager. Steve is the Executive Director of the Will Rogers Memorial.
I'd like to introduce Andy Hogan. Andy is our Will Rogers interpreter, and he is the person who shows groups around the museum.
This room that we begin our tour in is the Western Art Gallery, and it's very fitting because Will was a sure enough cowboy in the West, born out here about 13 miles on a farm. The second room we come to here is a room that is dedicated to the plane crash that took Will's life in 1935 when he was flying with Wally Post up in Alaska. Then over on the far side of this room, we have things pertaining to Will's life. Will said he was an ugly baby, that when he was born, his daddy quit having kids. He said, we're not going to have any more kids. So Will got to be the youngest child. Of the 8 children born, only 4 of them lived due to childhood diseases. Will had ended up with 3 older sisters. He respected females a lot because his older sisters beat him up enough times that he learned to respect women. His mother and his dad here on the top row. Will's dad was a very influential person in early Oklahoma. He was a Cherokee judge, a Cherokee senator. Will had 3 children that lived. He had Will Jr., born in 1911, married, born in 1913, and Jimmy, born in 1915. All 3 of them were in movies a little bit. Will started movie making in 1918 in New Jersey. Moved to California that same year, 1918, and ended up making 50 silent movies. He made 21 talking movies. These were sculpted by Joe Mora. That's Will and his dad. They're headed to town. His 3 sisters and his mother waiting there at the doorway. This depicts the old home ranch built in 1875 and out on the Verdigris River. Will went to a lot of different schools. He said, I didn't do well in schools. But this was the little school he went to up in Veneta, called Willie Hostel College, even though it was an elementary school. Will liked to take that rope to school with him and pester the girls. He said he went to school with the idea he wanted to remain ignorant, and said he was successful at it. This is Will riding down Main Street in Claremore, Oklahoma here. This is Comanche, the little horse he's riding right there, that his dad gave him to bribe him to stay home and behave a little bit. Will took off about 1900 for Texas to be a cowboy. This shows him working for the different ranches. They didn't have rodeos in the early days, but they had steer roping contests. This was Will's steer roping right there, and that's the little Comanche. Will got into the Ziegfeld Follies here. When he worked for Ziegfeld, he said Ziegfeld was glamorized the American female. But he said my job was to come out on the stage and entertain people while those girls were changing from nothing to nothing. Will had one of the first programs on the radio. He had a 15-minute Sunday night program, and he had trouble shutting up in 15 minutes, so he'd set an alarm clock to ring in 15 minutes. Here he is out in Santa Monica, California. He bought some land out in Santa Monica. Today, it's a state park. Will wrote for a syndicate out in New York. Before noon, he'd stop everything and sit down and write his article. This was a movie set for Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. That's Will sitting over there on that old Cadillac convertible coupe with his typewriter, typing up his daily article. Will was quite a philanthropist. One of the things that he raised money for was an earthquake down in Managua, Nicaragua. Here comes Will in the Ford Tri-Motor plane. He helped raise money for the floods in Mississippi back in the 30s, for the drought in Oklahoma, the Dust Bowl. August the 15th, 1935, he and Wally got lost, landed on a slough to ask directions from an Eskimo seal hunting party. After taking off, not over about 100 feet high, when the motor sputtered and died, the plane crashed into the lagoon. This was an Eskimo that observed the crash. Claire Okpiehe, he went for help. One thing that's kind of unique here, we have a lot of Will's sayings. A lot of his favorite quotes are on the wall here. A lot of people read some of these quotes and they'll realize that he was just an old country boy that just understood things a little better than what he was supposed to. Will originally was buried in Glendale, California in 1935, and then in 1944, after this tomb area was built, his body was reinterred along with an infant son that died out in California, and they were placed in a mausoleum here, and then Betty died that same year, 1944. Altogether, there's 6 of them now, members of the family, that are buried underneath here in a mausoleum. This sarcophagus is symbolic. If you lifted the lid on it, you could actually look down inside of the mausoleum. We have representation of our headstones here in the front that tells the 6 members of the family that are here: Will, Betty, Mary, Jimmy, and Freddie. And the only one that's not here of the immediate family was Will Jr. This is Will on soap suds. Will said, my favorite thing to do, just get on old soap suds and just ride up into the mountains.
Andy, I say thanks. Thanks a lot for showing us this museum. You certainly are an expert on Will Rogers.